we have demonstrated to the world that we're not reliable. You can't trust us. With a stroke of a pen, banks in New York City and elsewhere in the United States can essentially deprive you of your funds. That's a very, very dangerous thing to do. So releasing funds, I'm in favor of it, 100%. We ought to end this practice of arbitrarily barring access to funds from foreign countries that we don't like for whatever particular reason. So on that point, I totally disagree with the people in Washington and their thinking. But then again, I want to live in a different world from the one they're happy with. I don't want to live in a state of unrelenting conflict with people when there's no reason for it. I want to be able to do business with everybody. I keep saying that, and people look at me, what do you mean? I mean exactly what I say. We want commerce. Now, we need to structure that in a way that's mutually beneficial. There are ways to do that without necessarily sanctioning everybody. That's part of it. The second part is that you could be right, that in the final analysis, he can't achieve everything and he may have to walk away. But what does walk away mean? Are you going to walk away from the enormous amounts of money that you pour into Israel on a routine basis? That's the question. Everyone on the Hill will stand up and say, oh, you can't do that. Which means if Israel has access to unending funding for whatever it wants to do, its behavior will not change. If you're trying to affect a change in behavior with Israel, you have to address the funding issue.
And I guess we'll find out if that's going to happen. I guess the next thing we're going to wait to see is when Trump finally rolls that out, and then we'll be able to say no longer this is leaked or that. But here's what he said, and then we can look at it. But Trump is not only in the news today because of this. Trump is also in the G7 here, and I just want to pop this up in here because Zelensky is also there again. I don't know why. But Zelensky says the G7 agreed Russia is not winning the war and discussed more sanctions. What do you make about Trump's issue there and about whether or not more sanctions is going to help?
I think President Trump has realized that he's a gargantuan liar. The war is lost. There's no chance for Ukraine in any way, shape, or form militarily to overcome the Russians. I think he knows that. I think he also senses that this is a trip backward in time. It's sort of like going to the Natural History Museum. Who is the G7? They're not necessarily the big movers and shakers they once were. The world has changed a great deal. And you talk about the Japanese. The Japanese are in a very difficult position, and they've made it abundantly clear to us, if you are going to demand that or try to prevent us from having access to Russian oil that we need right now in Japan, well, we'll just sell off the rest of your debt. This is, we have a bond market that's very fragile. You turn on, the analysts, pick your analyst, whoever it is, from Ray Dalio to Luke Groman to Gundlach, any number of them. They'll all come back to the same thing. What's the bond market doing? Because that's been the bellwether for so much in our history. And many of these European states, they have one foot in the financial grave right now. I mean, imagine Starmer showing up for a thing like this. He has about as much credibility as Al Capone. Forget it. So I think President Trump is sort of surveying everything. I think he sort of intuitively grasps some of this. How much, I can't tell you, but I think he gets it. I think he understands this is the past, not the future. And I think he understands that's also true in the Middle East. You can only fight the future so long. And eventually, if you continue to fight it, you will be destroyed by it.
Now, let me ask you this question on the Russia-Ukraine war itself. Obviously, President Trump comes into office and says, yep, I'm going to have this done. We're going to knock it out in one day. And then it was 100 days and ad infinitum. And now here 17 months later, he's basically saying, yeah, I'm washing my hands of it, not doing anything. The day before he left for the G7, it didn't get much press here because so many other things were going on. But Vladimir Putin initiated a phone call, and they talked for about an hour. And Putin was bringing up ways he he thought he could try and bring about an end to this. And I think that he did that ahead. He was ostensibly to wish Trump a happy birthday, but it was ahead of the G7. And then you can see the headlines from today. It doesn't seem that released a lot because it says Trump signals swift return to sanctions on Russian oil as G7 refocuses on Ukraine. And, you know, the whole deal, again, this is I remember, Doug, you and I were talking this well over a year ago, that we keep the Europeans keep going back to that sanctions. The first 18 rounds didn't do anything, and then they came with that round number 19, that was going to do it. Then 20, that wasn't going to do it. And now here 21, they're trying to do another one. I mean, at what point do they just have to see this is just continue to saw off the limb that they're standing on?
You know, FDR at the end of the Potsdam conference was in pretty bad shape, and it wasn't long before he died. And he was talking to the admiral who functioned as his senior military advisor and also effectively as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And the admiral said to President Roosevelt, you know, Mr. President, these agreements that you've signed with the Soviets, nobody believes that the Soviets will ever honor those agreements. Nobody believes that this is good for the West or for the United States and our allies. And he finally, this is Admiral Leahy, and he finally turned to Admiral Leahy and he said, I know, but I'm just too damn tired to fight anymore. And of course, not long thereafter, he passed away. He was tired. He shouldn't have been president. He should never have had that last term. There's nothing we can do about that. I don't know where President Trump is. I think President Trump is focused very narrowly right now in the Middle East. If he can make some success out of it, perhaps he will then turn his attention back to Ukraine. But for the moment, I think he's decided to fight one event at a time. And so the fact that he says, I'm going to go along with this simply signals that I don't have time to deal with it right now. I'm not going to fight this bunch. I'm going to focus on where I am right now in the Middle East. And I think that's what's happening.
And so the question is going to be, where do we go from here? Because, and I think that there's some justification. I know Gary's looking to see if we have a specific soundbite, because based on what you just said there, really, I think it really sounds like he's kind of leaning in that direction. But at some point, he's going to have to do something. I mean, I guess you could just keep trying to kick the can down the road. But let me ask it in the form of a question. Can we just kick the can down the road forever and then not worry about it and literally go 2.5 more years for Trump and just let this thing founder? Can we survive that?
Well, I think we can. To be frank with you, in Europe, the deal in Europe for President Trump is as follows. You're dealing with people that are presiding over financial, economic, social, and cultural disasters in their own countries. Most of the leaders who are there at this conference will not last much longer. I'm surprised any of them are still there. When I look at Merz, I'm shocked. When I look at Macron, I can't believe it. And Starmer, insane. So there are going to be major convulsive changes after this G7 across Europe. All you have to do is look at what's happening in Ireland, in Southern Ireland, in Northern Ireland, recently in Glasgow. And you have a news blackout that's being imposed by these globalist leaders that don't want the world to know that inside Germany, inside France, inside the Netherlands, inside Great Britain, there is extreme discontent with what's being done to those societies by this massive immigration problem and the massive mismanagement of finances and the stupidity of trying to cultivate war against Russia. So those things are underway. Now, does President Trump get a briefing on this? Does anybody tell him about that? I don't know. But I think for the reasons that I just said, much of what's wrong in Europe is going to be solved. It's not going to be solved through military force. It's not going to be solved by the Russians or us. It's going to be solved internally in these countries. And the governments that come to power are going to be singularly disinterested in going to war with Germany because their populations with Russia, because their populations don't want to go to war. Aliza Vital has given a couple of really excellent speeches. Whether or not she ever emerges to lead that country, I don't know, and we'll see. But she has pointed the way. and she is the beginning of the change, not just in Germany, but I think across Europe, where she is saying, look, as soon as we have power in Berlin, we're going to Russia. And we're going to work out new arrangements. We want to import energy. We want to end the deindustrialization of Germany. We want to put people back to work. And we're going to tackle this ugly, difficult issue of rounding up millions of people that don't belong in this country, who should never have been admitted, and sending them home. These are the things that she's saying, because they've got to restore the rule of law in Germany. Now, you and I lived in Germany. I've spent almost 8 years of my life living off and on in Germany. That's a country where until 2015, even earlier than that, you never had to worry about the rule of law. I mean, you had policemen that could never be bribed. They wouldn't even think about it. There was no corruption, and the enforcement of the law was immediate, uniform, just, and effective. That's changed, and they've got to get that back. They know that. So I think Europe is poised for revolutionary change on the scale of 1848, and that's going to solve some of these problems. When I say some of them, I'm talking about the problem of war with Russia. That's going to go away, absolutely go away. And when that happens, Zelensky's funds dry up and Zelensky has no support. He'll find an aircraft, I'm sure, and fly somewhere fast to get out of town. He'll look like our friends in Kabul at the end, believe me. And he has no support in Western Ukraine. The people there are sick of it. You've seen the photographs. You've seen the video footage. People don't want anything to do with this war. And he's trying to push the Europeans to send Ukrainians that are overseas, men, young single men, back to fight. Well, I think they'd like to push a lot of these young single Ukrainians out so they can open up jobs for their own people. But I don't think they're going to send Ukrainians to die pointlessly in eastern Ukraine in a war with Russia that Ukraine has no chance of winning. I think President Trump gets that, but again, why should he wrap himself around the telephone pole at this point over that? He's got problems in the Middle East he's got to solve. And I think he's going to try that first.
Yeah, well, we certainly wish him well on that front as well. Interesting. So President Trump apparently on the margins of the G7 met briefly with Zelensky. Who knows what he said? We'll have to wait and see. But here's what he said a couple of days ago on the Ukraine situation.
Are you going to have a special focus on Ukraine?
Well, we're going to look. Now we were focused on Iran. That's going to be in the back, in the rear view mirror. But look, we have nothing to do with it. We sell weapons to them. We don't even give them. Obama gave them $350 billion worth of what gave, which was crazy. The European Union pays us full price for weapons. But it's not that. It has no impact on us other than we sell weapons. We're thousands of miles away.
Gary had one from today. That's not from a couple of days ago.
No.
That's from today.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem. Woodrow Wilson opened his credit markets to France and Great Britain, and he also opened them to Germany. But he knew during World War I that the Germans were not going to be able to get out of Germany and come to the United States to gain access to credit from us. And so what did he do? He effectively aligned us early on with the British and the French in their war with Germany. That was dishonest and it was destructive, because within 6 months, France and Great Britain were running out of money. The French president in 1914, when he was asked after the war began, how long will this last? He said, well, 6 to 8 months. After that, there is no money. Well, we made up the deficit. So we kept the First World War going and we profited from it, exactly as President Trump is talking about it. It's morally reprehensible. It's wrong. And he should not do that. But morally reprehensive acts are pretty commonplace inside the Beltway, and self-enrichment seems to outweigh any moral consideration these days on either side of the aisle. But I think people need to understand that we were instrumental in making this war in 1914 last as long as it did, and ultimately in the complete destruction of Central East Europe as a result. And we know what that meant. It brought communism to power in Russia and eventually National Socialism to power in Berlin. Dumb, stupid, foolish. So he needs to cut it off. And that's what he should do as soon as possible. You talk about how important it is to cut off the Israelis from the funds and the munitions and the weapons that they are using to destroy their neighbors. It's no less important to cut off Ukraine. If you don't do it, eventually the Russians, and I think reality will set in with Europe, but more people will die needlessly.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. I guess the last question, I know we're running low on time, but you can print money, you can build weapons, you can create long-range strikes, etc. You can't print men, though. And every day these Ukrainian folks have died, and God only knows what the actual number is, clearly in the hundreds of thousands of dead, and who knows how many more wounded. There has to come an expiration point where it won't matter how much money or how many weapons you send over there. Doesn't there come a point where the Ukraine side will just have necessity collapse?
Well, there's so much money to bankroll Zelensky and his inner circle, to pay off people in the Rada and keep the secret police flush with cash and the various oligarchs happy, that quite frankly, the people of Ukraine don't matter in Ukraine. That's the issue. Putin is struggling right now with a great deal of pressure, not just from the Russian populace that wants an end to this, and they certainly do, but from his inner circle to take action. We'll see what happens. Recently, we've had some dramatic strikes that you've reported on by the Russians against Ukraine. And we have a continuous advance along the Russian front. Pokrovsk has fallen. Zaporozhye is in range. Essentially, Novorossiya, which we talked about years ago, is becoming a reality. The question is, how do you end this if you're a Russian? And I think the reality is setting in that if the Europeans are not going to come to their senses, you're going to have to cross the river and go into Kiev. But that's something that they don't want to do. And remember that one of the things that's being uppermost in President Putin's mind is not only he wants to spare lives, he's concerned about sparing Russian lives. He's also tried to spare Ukrainian lives, contrary to what people think. But the other thing that he has to consider is NATO. And you have these maniacs that keep talking about war with Russia. Now, we just had the British defense minister resign his post. And he has talked privately and admitted somewhat publicly the British Defense Department is broke. You know, the British armed forces are in ruins. They have nothing with which to fight. Gosh, what a shocker. Well, take a long, good look at everybody else in Europe. Are the French a little better? Yes. But are the French up to a full-fledged war against Russia? Of course not. And Germany? Come on, don't even go there. They've been running every nationalist in Germany out of the military, and the European populations collectively don't want to draft, and they don't want to fight anywhere. So at the end of the day, I think President Putin will probably decide to take some action. And that will be used against Russia. See, this is the issue, Dan. The Russians could go to Kiev tomorrow. If they do that, people are going to say, see, Putin wants to conquer Eastern Europe. It's complete nonsense. It's never been true. But he may not have any choice, because this criminal regime is not going to go away as long as it has cash, equipment, and support. And by the way, we think they have at least 40 to 50,000 mercenaries on the ground in Ukraine fighting for Ukraine. They can't find enough men who are Ukrainian to fight for Ukraine. And it's astonishing that there could be that many, because the Russians have made it clear if they capture a person who is a mercenary who is not Ukrainian, that person can be executed under Russian law as a terrorist. So it's astonishing to me that this thing continues. It's a meat grinder. It's just a blood-absorbing sponge that makes no sense. And I'm saddened by Donald Trump's readiness to just sign off on more stupidity for Ukraine. I'm saddened by the people on the Hill that run around with these little flags on their lapels without understanding what they're doing and what the consequences are for the people in Ukraine. But that's the way it is.
It is. Do you have time for one more question?
One more. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. This is what Hex has said about how, in terms of how long can we go? This is what Hex has said about our ammunition stockpiles. Don't even worry about it.
We're supercharging our arsenal of freedom, building more, building faster, opening up the Pentagon, ripping through the Pentagon bureaucracy to force industry to move faster. So
but there are crisis, there is a crisis with those stockpiles right now. There is a crisis with those stockpiles right now in private industry.
That is a manufactured story that the media wants to peddle. And ultimately, our stockpiles.
Okay, Gary, that's long enough.
Great,
he said there's no crisis, Doug. He said there's no crisis. We can just keep going. Is he telling the truth?
In his mind, I think he feels obligated as the Secretary of War to tell everybody, don't worry, everything's just fine. There is no crisis. In truth, you've got to look at the whole range of missions and equipment and munitions and weapons. And you begin to see that we are reaching a point now where it is not in our interest to delve deeply into those stockpiles. We've already exhausted well, let's put it this way. We've exhausted depth in our capabilities, in our stockpiles. It's not the end of the world, but it's dangerous. I mean, if you take the position that we might have to fight a major high-end conventional war, yes, we're not sufficiently stocked. And keep in mind, we have not mobilized the country, and there's no reason to. Remember when they started talking about Russia early on, well, the Russians are going to run out of this or that or next week, and 2 months from now, the Russians will have nothing left. Well, Putin mobilized industry. He went short of total mobilization, but he had partial mobilization. We haven't done that. Could we do that? Sure, we could. Do we need to? No, we don't. So I probably would not have said things the way he did, which is, don't look here. There's no problem. We're golden. We're fine. We're the arsenal of freedom. Okay, thanks. Thanks, coach. We'll go on to the football team and do the best we can. But, we need less hyperbole in Washington, Dan. We need the facts, but we also need a balanced assessment. And the best balanced assessment I can give is, are we at critical levels in some areas? Yes. Can we rectify that? Yes. Are we doing something to address it? Yes. Next question. That would be enough. We don't need the cheerleading speech.
And apparently that's all we're going to get. But then that's also all the time we have today. Thank you for going a little bit overtime with us, Doug. Always much appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
There, people can see more of Doug on his Substack, where he publishes stuff at MacGregorWarrior.substack.com. Thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you. Bye-bye. When you turn to our side, do we have another 1,000 joint air surface-to-surface missiles? We expended 1,000 of those in the first 3 weeks, most of those, frankly, in the space of a week. I don't know. I suspect we've probably replenished those stocks. There are others where we've replenished with as much as we can provide, particularly your anti-missile missiles, your PAC-3, your THAAD missiles. What have we got in terms of radars? Well, that's a grim picture. The radars that are being destroyed have not been replaced. They cost hundreds of millions of dollars, take years to manufacture. Whether or not we have anything left to put on the ground, I don't know. It could be that we would bring in whatever is left around the world. But my point is, I think the Iranians are in a better position than we are. That doesn't mean that they'll win and we'll lose. It's too soon to say that. Then the other point is, how many precision-guided bombs do we have? And do we have unguided bombs? I suppose we probably do. And if you're trying to demoralize your enemy, we still periodically rely on the provision of, say, B-52s, each of which carries 90 500-pound bombs. You do the math. How many B-52s can you fly over an area? That's called carpet bombing. That clearly can be done. Then the Israelis have been reprovisioned as much as we could afford. But I don't think their air and missile defense is likely to be infinitely more capable than it was. I think they're in a tougher position. We still have a lot of missile defense in the fleet. So that's the picture. We have a lot more ships now at sea. We have more carriers out there, more pilots, more planes. I think we have replaced the losses of the KC-135s, the fuel tankers. So I think we're gearing up for something similar to what you saw before, only far more intense up front. Now, you asked about ground troops. What I find interesting, based on the reports that you read, and I'm not on the inside. I'm not attending any of these meetings, so what I'm dealing with is hearsay, Glenn. That means I'm reading what the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others who are fed things by the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency and so forth, and from the Pentagon. And what they're suggesting is that President Trump has been unenthusiastic about the use of ground forces. He has said, I don't really want to do that. That's a very good thing, because I can't imagine any operation involving the use of ground forces in the Persian Gulf to seize islands that would make any difference to the outcome in the Gulf. I just can't imagine it. I don't know what they would be used for, because it's not going to give them control of the Gulf just because they're sitting on an island. And I always worry about, how do you resupply them? How do you evacuate people who are wounded? All this sort of business. Now, we'll see whether or not they try to do something. I'm sure Special Operations Command wants to do things. I'd be very surprised if people in the Army and the Marines don't want to do something. But I'm encouraged that President Trump, at least, has expressed reservations about it. So what will the Iranians do? And I think this is very important. We talked about the enormous damage we're prepared to do. They made it very clear that they will destroy most of what's on the west coast of the Persian Gulf. And that is of great concern to the entire world. If you stop and consider that the ingredients for your fertilizer, about 50% of these things, urea, nitrogen, phosphate, and so forth, 50% of it comes out of the Persian Gulf. And you're going to destroy this infrastructure? I think we're looking down the line at famine across the global south. It's unavoidable. We talk in terms of liquid natural gas and petroleum. Those are already problems. There are people rationing things already in India, in Indonesia, in Thailand, and Vietnam. The cost of a barrel of jet fuel, I'm told, is now over $240 a barrel and rising. It's not even on hand. Apparently, Britain is going to run out of anything in about 2 weeks in terms of both jet fuel and heating fuel. And of course, all these countries in Western Europe that have gone crazy on the green energy business are in terrible positions. And they've also shut down many of their nuclear reactors. Now, the French haven't, but the Germans have. And I'm sure this is an emergency status. I think what you're going to see happen in Europe now, governments are going to be overthrown. You're going to see new governments come to power. What can they do? Well, we'll see. I don't think they're going to be able to correct the problems very quickly, because most analysts that have looked at what I would say the magnitude of destruction from the first round have said it'll take a year, maybe 2 years, if we were to stop now, to recover in the Persian Gulf. And most people, understanding what I've just outlined to you, are concluding accurately, I think, that it will take 5 to 10 years to recover. And we're not sure what recover means, because a lot of this infrastructure in the Gulf may never be rebuilt. I mean, the decision may simply be made not to go back in there. And if anybody does go in there, I would say it would probably be China. Because right now, the sort of global, what's the right word? The sort of global safe area for cash and money is increasingly going to be China, not the United States. And I think that's where things are headed. If you look at just the credit markets, people are going to go to China to borrow, not come to the United States. And I think the petrodollar is already dead. Whether or not the yuan replaces it is anybody's guess. Probably could, but it may be a basket of currencies. And I think the Emirates and the Saudi House of Saud, all of these people are really in danger of losing their countries in the sense that others will take over in their absence. Because we know that large numbers of the Gulf elites have already fled to Egypt and Europe and other places. And again, we don't know what will happen in the region this time around. You have the Turks that have geared up, in my estimation, to be far more involved this time around than they were previously. So are the Egyptians. I don't see how Israel fares very well through all of this, because whatever incentive may have existed in the past for the Iranians to exercise restraint no longer exists. And I think they've made that very clear. They're ready to go to a total war fitting. We've never done that. And the lesson of history is he who goes to total war fitting, certainly in the 20th century, has a better shot of winning if he does it immediately than the person who does it. Remember, we forget that Hitler did not totally mobilize the German state and nation and people for war until mid-1943. How could you possibly wage war on multiple fronts the way they did and expect to win? On the other hand, the Soviets lived in a state of war mobilization and went to total mobilization very quickly. We did too, and so did Great Britain. We are not going to do that to defeat Iran. That's an impossibility. Now, I should be careful because I'm sure you've seen the report that apparently General Kane, in his infinite wisdom, suggested to President Trump that it might be useful to consider conducting operations in the Strait of Malacca against Iranian vessels. I think that's a catastrophe. But it's not unusual for someone who's already losing a war to think that they could expand the war to other areas and conceal the loss in one place and ultimately bring it to a successful close elsewhere. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but I know that there are people that probably think that way. And there are foolish people out there who say, well, fine, then we'll also stop Chinese ships, because after all, the Chinese are supporting the Iranians. That's your opportunity to spread and widen the war even further. And one of the reasons the Chinese have been so sensitive to the South China Sea is they know from their history that whoever controls the South China Sea ultimately controls the flow of resources into and out of China. The Royal Navy did that. The French did it before the Royal Navy. And ultimately, the Imperial Japanese Navy did it. So the bottom line is I see no good news here, no good new direction. The ideal outcome, frankly, at this stage would be to simply end this series of hostilities and put a stop to the whole thing and admit that we cannot, employing our military power, gain control of the Strait of Hormuz. What the Iranians have got, they're going to keep. And it's up to the rest of the world, once this war ends, to sit down with Iran and work out something similar to the Montreux Convention, which was created in 1926 and put the Turks in charge of the Dardanelles. By the way, the Turks have handled that very well. There haven't been any problems there. A similar convention can be set up.